Good morning, everyone. If you would, please open up to Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18. I hope you're all doing well and happy Father's Day to all of the fathers this morning. It's been a wonderful day so far, and I'm very glad to be here together with all of you. So, as you know, we've been going through the Old Testament. We're trying to finish up the first 5 books within the next few weeks. This morning, we're doing a few chapters in Exodus because it's going to be very important for what we're setting up with Mount Sinai, including today the establishment of the Ten Commandments. So, where are we right now?
In the wilderness.
Yeah, they're in the wilderness on the escape from Egypt. First chapter, God established that he made them into the great nation, which is one of the 3 major promises. And now he is leading them to the second major promise. What is he leading them towards?
Get the land.
Yeah, the promised land, the land of Canaan. And so right now they're in the wilderness between Sinai and Egypt, but they're headed to Sinai, and that's where we'll get today. But we saw that before this, God did the plagues on Egypt, and what was the purpose on the plagues for the Egyptian?
There's only one God.
One God, and it is Yahweh. Remember in the beginning, what did Pharaoh say about Yahweh? Who is he that I should listen to? I don't know that guy. And Moses, or God through Moses, certainly showed him who he was. And then, what was the purpose of all of the plagues and then the Red Sea for the Israelites?
So that he is God.
Yeah, so that they know that he is God. It was very purposeful, every single thing that God did, and I hope we've kind of seen that it wasn't random acts that God decided to do, but each thing had a reason that he was going to show them. And most recently with the Red Sea, remember that God has power over the greatest armies of the world. So Israel should have no fear when they come up to the people they are inevitably going to face going into the land of Canaan. And that's very important that we establish that because we know what the people are going to do when they get to the land of Canaan. But God gave them reasons to be faithful anyway. But in Exodus chapter 19, Exodus chapter 17, we had the incident where the people were complaining. That was the 3rd time in a row that the people had complained against God for something different. And then the Amalekites attacked Israel. What happened with the Amalekites? Oh, wait, we didn't even get to talk about that last time. We ran out of time. Exodus chapter 17, I guess we'll start a few verses back. Exodus 17, verses 8 through 16. After the Israelites have complained against God multiple times, the Israelites, they come up to the Amalekites. While they're still at a place called Rephidim, the Amalekites come and they attack them. And Moses tells Joshua to choose some men to go and fight against Amalek. And the next day, while all this is happening, Moses goes to the top of the hill with the rod of God in his hand. Is this sounding familiar? And so, as long as Moses holds his hands up, what happens?
They went.
Right. And what happens if he lowers his hands? Yeah. There's a series on YouTube. It's actually pretty entertaining called The Promised Land. Esther and I watched it together. It's very clean. It's about this time in Israel. And it was comical because they had Moses up there with his staff holding it up, and you hear the people in the background say, "Yes, we're winning. God is with us." And Moses sneezes, his arm is down, and immediately you hear, "No, we're losing. God has left us." And it was just, that immediate back and forth. It was comical, but the idea was true. As long as Moses did exactly what God said, the people were winning. And so what happens? First with Moses, he's getting tired, so what do they have to do? Yeah, it's exhausting. Even a 1 pound weight, if you're to hold it out like this for 5 minutes, you're gonna be shaking. It's hard, your arm is heavy. So having to hold a staff over your head all day, it's tiring. So Joshua comes up and they hold Aaron and Hur, actually, not Joshua, hold stones under Moses' arm, and he holds it up. And because of this, Joshua and this small group of Israelites were able to defeat the Amalekite army. And at the end of the chapter, after the victory, God tells Moses to write this event as a memorial in a book and tell Joshua that he will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalekite from under heaven, meaning that they're going to be totally wiped out. And that's exactly what happened. But what is interesting, and the reason I wanted to point that out, is because God is telling Moses to write this down. And there's going to be a bunch of times in these next few bits where God tells Moses to write this down. Just some little side points as to the authorship of what we're reading is over and over Moses. Even later, Jesus calls it the Book of Moses, the Law of Moses. Just something to reaffirm that because we mentioned it a long time ago, I believe. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Sorry, I just thought I saw it in your eyes. Okay, any thoughts on the end of chapter 17?
It is interesting. I believe isn't this the first reference to Joshua? I think
Actually, I don't
I
even.
think it's the
I
first
think
time he's mentioned.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so we have introduced here a new character that's going to have great significance as we go along.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that is very interesting. This is his introduction. That's a good catch. Okay, chapter 18. Now, after all of this, they're in the wilderness, and Jethro hears about what happened at the Red Sea and what God did for Israel in verse 1. Who's Jethro?
Moses.
His father-in-law.
Yeah, Moses' father-in-law. And so he comes and he takes Moses' wife Zipporah, who had still been with him, and their two sons, and they travel to the wilderness where Moses is at the mountain of God. Where's the mountain of God?
Mount Sinai?
Yeah, Mount Sinai. What was it also known as? The first time when God promised that Moses would come here and serve him. Starts with an H. Is it Hebron? I thought it was Hebron. If it is Horem, that's totally my fault. I thought it was Hebron. Let me go double check. I believe that's chapter 3. I don't know how that totally left my mind. Horeb, yeah. Horeb. So we were both a little mixed. Sorry about that. But they're at Horeb, which is also known as Mount Sinai. And um, God had promised earlier, if you remember, in chapter 3, that Moses would be back here to serve him. And so this is the completion of that. Moses and Israel are now here in this area. And when they arrive, Moses welcomes his family and begins to tell Jethro the full story. Because, Jethro heard about this event, but now he's there with Moses and he tells him this full story about how God brings him out of the land of Egypt with the plagues and how he overtook Egypt with great power and judgment. And as Jethro listens, he rejoices. And what does he say about Yahweh in verse 11?
Blessed be the Lord.
And what about him?
He's greater than any other God.
And yeah, that he is greater than every other God. How would Jethro have known about Yahweh? Yeah, his daughter's married to Moses. He spent a lot of time with Moses. Is there anything else? Martin, did you have an idea?
Well, he would have known it through his own ancestry.
Exactly.
He's a descendant of Abraham.
Exactly right. And so that family is also associated with God, but as we've seen has happened with all of the descendants, they still needed reassurance. And so Jethro hears all this. Moses is telling him the first-hand witness, and he's like, now I'm sure Yahweh is greater than all of the other gods. Just something to have in the back of our minds. And that he knows this because of what he's seen. And then verse 12, Jethro offers a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron and all the elders come to eat a meal with him, and the people of Israel. All of this in the presence of the Lord. So you can imagine that this became quite a great feast if all of the people of Israel were there, which we know at this point is over 1 million people strong. And so this is something that started with Jethro and Moses, then the elders, then all the people, and they're all celebrating the greatness of the Lord. But then the next day, Moses has to get back to work. And Jethro watches as Moses sits down in front of the people from morning all the way until evening, doing what? Verse 13.
Advice to the people.
Yeah, judging, giving advice, settling disputes. And are these people known for pleasantly settling disputes? Is that something we know about the current people? No, what's happened already multiple times in their time in the wilderness? They've basically come and attacked Moses and complained greatly that they've led them in the wrong place. And then, of course, we know that Moses says, really, you're complaining against God. But this has been a complaining people. And so you can imagine that this isn't a pleasant job. And Moses, one man, is doing this for over 1 million people. Can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine dealing with 1 million complaints every time anyone had any petty grievance, all the way to the worst sort of crime? Every day, because you're the only one who can do it. Sometimes I get tired listening to 2 or 3 different problems in a day, but that's nowhere near what Moses is having to do. And it's every day, and it's just him. So you can see how this would be absolutely exhausting, is the point that I'm trying to make. And so everyone at all who has a problem comes to Moses, and he has to handle every single case. And so Jethro is concerned about this. He's seeing what it's doing to Moses. And he asks him a question, verse 14, why do you sit alone while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? And so Moses is explaining to Jethro that the people come to him to seek God's guidance, which this is a point of good for the people because it is obvious that Moses is with God. We've seen earlier in Egypt that the people of Israel accepted that Moses was the one God was using, and even Egypt knew that Moses was the one that God was using. So the people were coming to where they knew they could get godly advice, which was Moses. So that is at least a point to the people. And he explains that he is the one that uses the guidance of God to help them with their disagreements. And so Jethro gives him some advice. And what does he say in verses 17 through 18? Yeah, this isn't good. Why isn't it good? Yeah, it's too much for one man. You need to delegate, as you said. You can't do it alone. And so he urges Moses to choose honest, capable men who fear God and appoint them as leaders. And he gives them divisions. It's similar to like what an army would do. You've got a head over thousands, over hundreds, over fifties, and over tens. It's like a hierarchy. And these leaders can handle the smaller matters, and it's like it goes to a higher court every time, and so that only the truly difficult cases are brought to Moses, and that's in verse 22. And so this way, Jethro is telling him he won't have to wear himself out, and the people will also be served more efficiently. Do you think that anyone is able to listen to 1 million complaints and address them all equally without being exhausted or having quick judgments of anger or tired? No. You want to be your best for every time you're judging a dispute or trying to help someone with something, or otherwise your emotions can get the best of your exhaustion. You can imagine it's just not a great situation to be doing that all the time. And so Jethro's advice is seen as or something like that because it was accepted by God and accepted by Moses. That you're just going to hear that sometimes. I don't have any official saying on that. Right now, what we see in the text, this is just advice from Jethro to Moses. Do you have a thought on that?
Interesting observation, maybe a little bit humorous, but today it's like going to the Charlottesville DMV or Walmart in the old days, and they only had one register open. The people, you're going to go talk to Moses. Well, you better get there early.
Yeah.
The way from that end.
Yeah, I like to think of him getting out of his tent bed in the morning and opening, and there's just a million people lined up to see him, and he's like, "Here we go again." But the idea is it was a lot of work. But what I want to point out also is the type of leaders that were emphasized were godly leaders who are already obedient. And then that's similar to the type of leaders that we want to look for is people who are already doing what they're trying to get others to do. That's why it's called a leader and not a boss in this case, because they're people who would know what God could do for them and how to spread what God wants. And so in verses 24 through 27, Moses listens to Jethro's counsel and he immediately puts the plan into action. And he chooses able men from all of the heads. It's not just one favorite group, from all of the heads of Israel, and puts them as those leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens. And these leaders judge the people at all times. It's an always open court, and only the hard cases reach Moses. And so after this really huge restructuring of the leadership, Jethro says goodbye to Moses and he returns to his own land. And so what we've come to, very important for what we're about to see, is Moses' time has now been freed up. Why is that important? Well, God is about to be using Moses a lot to be placing these new laws into the people. And if Moses' time is filled up with having to judge all of these things, how can he also be, away for 40 days as he's going to be sometimes? You couldn't do that. Your people would go into chaos. So this was crucial. It's not just something that we should look over, it's something we should remember that even though Moses goes up to the mountain, the people still had leaders. And so what we know is going to happen with the golden calf really should never have happened. And that's just something to keep in mind.
It's kind of similar to Act 6, isn't it, where the apostles needed to have their time.
Exactly.
Right away.
Yeah, and what if you don't know just right off the top of your head, Acts 6, where they appointed deacons so that the apostles could go doing the word, preaching the word throughout the world, and the deacons could handle taking care of the church. Very similar to that. And so God is going to be using Moses' free time now to set the laws to the people. You see how that little event right here is actually very important for the entire rest of this section. Anyways, before we conclude, there are just a couple things I wanted to notice about the chapter that are very applicable now. And that, first of all, none of us are meant to have to handle everything by ourselves. Moses tried to do that. It was too hard. It took all of his time, and he was exhausted. When we try to do that, it's often too hard, takes too much of our time, we end up exhausted. Just like how there's always been structure that God has given to his people to back you up, we have that same structure here in the church. And just a side note, we don't have to do everything by ourselves. And especially if we're struggling with something, we don't have to do it alone. God gave us the church to back us up in the same way that he's always wanted his people to back up his people. Just a thought. And then also good leadership in this situation, which is going to be important for what we see later. Good leadership is able to take constructive criticism and then make changes. That's what we've seen with Moses. He took this advice from Jethro and he made some changes. Now we're going to come into some leaders later who hear constructive criticism that would actually help them actually get angry or do the exact opposite. Just to keep that in our minds. Are there any thoughts on chapter 18? Pete?
If, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but Jethro seemed like an outsider to me. And I think if this is true, then we should not be closed-minded to anybody that has anything to say, whatever their religion is or whatever they stand up for.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Jethro does come from the lineage of Abraham. He does worship Yahweh, and he does have some, you know, different beliefs. Uh, but that is a good point. When we start to close our minds off to people who may have a different perspective or come from a different background, we end up missing something ourselves. And sometimes they could be right and we could be wrong.
In the New Testament, it says, try the spirit to see if there are God.
Exactly, exactly. And so I do like that it is very true not to close our minds off to people and always be willing to check ourselves what they're saying. That's a good point. Anything else? All right.
Maybe it also is humility in the leader's part. It came to me that a lot of times leaders are either afraid or control freaks, if you will. They don't understand that their leadership and their ability to lead gets more effective when they allow others to take responsibilities on.
Yeah, you're right. And Moses writes later that Moses was the most humble man in all the earth. So we know, I'm pretty sure Joshua wrote that, but it is kind of funny. But you're right. It does take a lot of humility. Okay, so now we get to Exodus chapter 19, and we kind of go back a little bit because we're already at this location in chapter 18, but then chapter 19 is kind of like we go back in time just a little bit to establish where they are. So chapter 19, it starts with saying, now that they are at Sinai, God calls Moses up to the mountain and he gives him a message to deliver to the people in verse 3. And he reminds them of how he carried them on eagle's wings and brought them where they are on his own, verse 4. And so God says that if they will obey his voice and keep his covenant, this is very important, they will be his treasured possession out of all the nations of the earth, and they will become a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, verse 6. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Yeah, First Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. Uh, let's see. Who would you like to read that?
But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light.
Thank you. So why do we bring this up in the New Testament? Well, these are the same titles that we're seeing given to this people here in the Old Testament. Meaning when they're given to us, they have the same conditions as they were given to the people in the Old Testament. What were the conditions in Exodus chapter 19, verse 5?
Well, you gotta obey God and keep his commandments.
Exactly. If you will obey me and keep my commandments. He's going to say this multiple times, especially when he puts them on the mountain of blessings and cursings. If you do this, you will get this. If you do not do this, you will be cursed by this. We want those titles. Do we want to be considered priests? Do we want to be a part of that holy nation? Obey the commandments of God. That's what he's telling this people. And so Moses comes down from the mountain and he brings this message down to the elders and the people. And I love verse 8 because this time they respond all together and they say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And so now we transition to the people are going to have to get ready for the presence of God. Verses 9 through 15. God tells Moses that he's going to come down to the people how? Yeah, in a thick cloud so that they can hear him speaking and believe him forever. But the people have to prepare themselves for this encounter. And I want to ask the question, why do you think that is? Why do they have to change? Well, first, I'll give you this. They were told to wash themselves and wash their clothes and prepare. Get ready for the Lord. Why? What have we discussed that the Lord is? Holy. That's exactly right. He is set apart. He is exalted. He is so far above all else. And to be in God's presence, what do you have to be? Clean, holy, wash, all of these things. And so, for these people to be in the presence of God, they have to dedicate themselves, separate themselves from the filth of the world, and be clean for the Lord. And it's also, they have a few days to do this. It's also time for them to be preparing in their minds, kind of like what we do in the Lord's Supper. We take moments to think about what we're about to do, to examine ourselves, to make our minds holy, or to be thinking on one thing. That's what these people are doing. And so for 2 days, they're to consecrate themselves by washing and even staying away from any sort of intercourse. And on the third day, God will come down from Mount Sinai onto Mount Sinai in the sight of everybody. And so Moses is told to set strict boundaries around the mountain. Why?
No,
Yeah,
touch it,
exactly. Why aren't they allowed to touch it? What will happen if they do?
they will die.
They will die, man or animal, and it's because it's holy. And the whole point of that boundary is to show the seriousness of this event and the seriousness of God's presence. And so then we get into verses 16 through 25, and the people have done what God said, and now he's actually going to descend, because on the third morning, or the morning of the third day, the mountain is covered with thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud, a very loud trumpet blast, and the whole mountain is smoking like a furnace because the presence of the Lord descends on it like a fire, in a fire, verse 18. This is just one of an artist rendition that I found on www.bible.ca. Lots of interesting images, but you can just imagine this. I mean, it would be an awesome encounter, one that would strike fear into people. Especially, have you ever seen videos of people watching the first movies? When a train comes towards them, they're flinching and they're trying to get out of the way because this is an unknown experience to them and it's right there. It looks like it's about to hit them. This is something to people who never had a screen, never sees the terrifying things that we see on a TV every day or hear all over the world. This is a people who only experience things that are in front of them. This is the first time that they would have ever experienced anything close to that. And even, I believe, with all that we've seen, we'd all still be shaking in our boots as well if we were in this same situation. This is not a normal thing. And so the people are terrified. They're trembling with fear, and Moses brings them out of the camp. You can imagine they're all hiding in their tents, and Moses is like, "Come on out, guys." And they bring them to meet with God at the foot of the mountain. And the trumpets that are blowing this whole time continue to go louder and louder as the Lord is speaking to Moses in verse 19. And so this chapter ends with this great trembling and loud trumpets, smoke, and fire and Moses getting instructions from God directly. So all the people are seeing this. It's their first time seeing it in this way, where they're truly understanding what is happening. Well, they're not understanding what is happening, but they're truly getting a sense of what's going on and what God is. And so this is the situation that's in the back of our minds when we get to Exodus chapter 20. God is still talking to Moses. So, any questions on chapter 19 or thoughts?
My question is, where did these priests come from?
Yeah.
In chapter 19, in this preparation of separating the people from Mount Sinai, and before the Lord comes down to the mountain, and later he does. But it refers to them as already existing. And yet, nowhere in Exodus do we have yet a delineation of the Levites will be the priestly tribe yet. All that
Mhm.
comes later.
Yeah, and I have thought about
And
that.
so who made these certain people priests?
A lot of
And
people,
were they Levites?
yeah, a lot of people believe that chapter 19, because of the way that it's portrayed and how we go to chapter 20 and we're getting the Ten Commandments, that chapter 19 is summarizing a lot of these events and the things that have happened while they're at Mount Sinai. I typically lean towards that that's probably the case. There are other people who debate different things. You have a thought?
He referred to him as a kingdom of priests.
Right.
So maybe he's just talking of using that term instead of the people.
That's true. That is also another thing that I've read. Um, and it could be either way. I lean towards to just my own thoughts that that would be a summary of these great events, and then we're going back again because the timeline would really fit better with going from 18 to chapter 20. But we go back in time in the beginning of chapter 19 when they just arrived at Mount Sinai. Then we get all that. Does that make sense?
I just it never have really has I never have poked at it
Yeah.
myself. I just recognized it this morning. I'm like, well, where did these people come from? I'm just sitting here asking myself questions, but
Yeah, that's a great thought because it is something we need to look at.
I mean, it could be, like Sandra said, initially, every single Israelite was to be a priest.
Yeah, that's a
reading it
possibility
correct.
too.
In its application today, even in the New Testament, as you put it in, originally Israel was even described as God's firstborn son
Yeah.
as a nation. And
Mhm.
Moses was to say that to Pharaoh. And so now, because of their inability to perhaps achieve the holiness that they needed, God inserted the Levites to represent the firstborn of all of Israel and the redemption and so forth that represented.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more in the priesthood there in the Old Testament that but they just showed up on the scene here. I mean,
And it's the same situation with Melchizedek, you know? It's like, what is this? But we just noticed there. And Pete, you had your hand up?
Well, verse 24 seems to make a distinction.
Yeah.
Do not let the priest and the people break through to come up to the Lord.
Yeah, and that's why I think it would be more of a summary just from the fact that it does distinguish the priests and the people at the end of the chapter. That's a good point. And
It's interesting just to know, when the people this first time, we're gonna serve God, and now they're about to have Mount Sinai. At the end of Joshua's life, who witnessed this first time, he basically said, you need to choose who you're gonna serve. We're gonna serve God. He goes, no, you aren't.
Right.
If you can't do it, then they affirmed again. That's well, here's what you gotta do. So Joshua later, I think, remembers this event to another generation. You gotta understand the holiness of God. I gotta understand it's not just words.
yeah, that's a good connection of when he says you've got to choose, and that's what it means is you got to put it away. Yeah. And I do think that's a part of, they say they're going to serve God here, but they haven't really put everything else away. Otherwise, I don't think we'd have what we had with the golden calf later. All right. Any other thoughts on chapter 19?
I just think it's kind of awesome how God keeps using the same things over and over. Being washed, baptism,
Yeah,
third day, risen. It's always been there.
absolutely. Esther and I were reading through Daniel this last week, and it was funny how many times he uses the same things and shadows of things to come just over and over again. It's all throughout the scripture. That's a good point. All right, Exodus chapter 20. Now God begins by reminding Israel again who he is and what he's done. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Verse 1. Just like you mentioned, he's repeating the same things. He's going to use this for their history until we get to Jeremiah. And so God then gives them the first 4 commandments. And what's very interesting is there's actually 2 sections in the 10 Commandments. And the first would be how the people treat God, their respect towards him. And so those first 4 commandments, in light of that, number 1, you shall what?
No other gods.
No other gods. Then, on top of that, you shall not make any carved images to worship. And he's very specific. Any carved images made out of anything for any type of worship. And so then you shall not use his name in vain, the name Yahweh. And then number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Why does that one go with the others? Well, remember in Genesis, God dedicated the Sabbath day as a day of rest, a day of remembrance to what he did in the days of creation. And so when it was time for them to rest, the whole point of the Sabbath rest was for them to have their minds on God. And so it still is the respect towards God. And so in that section, he says that he is a jealous God. And I'd like to spend a second here. What does jealous mean?
He wants us to not worship any others but him.
Exactly. And did I hear zeal? Is that what you said?
Zealous, I said.
Zealous, yeah. Did you have something?
Yeah,
Okay. And that's exactly right. First of all, the word jealous today and this word, not the same word. The Hebrew word that is used here is kana. Our word for jealousy, according to the dictionary, means envious or resentful of good fortune or achievements of another. Does that fit the context of God saying he doesn't want you to worship someone else? Is he resentful because of your success or something like that? No, no, it's not. But the Hebrew word kana means demanding exclusivity. And in God's case, demanding exclusive service. When he says he's a jealous God or a zealous God, he's a God that wants you for himself, to have no other things just keeping you from apart. So there is a titch of what we would have in our jealousy. It does work, but there's not a resentfulness towards you. He resents the other evils, but he wants you to serve him alone. When it says God is a jealous God, he wants you all to himself. Um, oh, we won't go there. So the first four commandments are set up as guidelines to keeping the people pure in their worship, to set them apart, or as we've said, make them holy. And of course, the Sabbath day is a day totally devoted to the greatness of the Lord. It's supposed to be a holy day. Okay. Then, verses 12 through 17. What in the world happened to my PowerPoint? Whatever. Verses 12 through 17, we get to the rest of the commandments. The first four were all about treating God with that certain level of respect. Now, the other six are about how we are to treat each other, or specifically how the Israelites were to treat each other. And he says, number 5, honor your father and mother. Number 6, do not murder. Number 7, do not commit adultery. 8, do not steal. 9, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. And 10, do not covet anything that belongs to anyone else. And these commandments protect human life, marriage, property, truth, contentment, and they show that God cares about how his people are treated just as much as he cares about how we see him. He wants us to love him, he wants us to love each other. Same with the Israelites. He wanted them to love him, he wants them to love each other. They're all supposed to be God's people. They were all supposed to be united under that one banner, and they were expected to treat each other in that way. And now, are these 10 commandments in chapter 20 the only commandments that the Israelites are going to get? No. In fact, there's going to be 613 commandments given to them. So why do we have this little section? Why are these put on the stones? Well, this is the essence of what God is wanting. He wants love and respect for himself and love and respect for all the people. And now there are obviously going to be more specific rules to deal with each one of these categories. If you stick to this, you're going to be pretty okay. And then he's going to give you the specifics later. But this is the starting, the foundation stone, pretty much. I mean, it is tablets. This is going to be able to hold you over while all of these other things are getting added. And of course, we know even in this next chapter, we're going to get into a little bit more detail. But this is the essence, if that makes sense. And these are really important. These are foundational. And we're going to actually talk about the Ten Commandments a little bit more as we go throughout these. But for right now, that's what we need. And then in verses 18 through 26, after this has been given, the people hear thunder and are seeing lightning, and they're feeling the mountain tremble, and they become terrified again, and they're begging Moses to speak to God on their behalf. So that what? Verse 19. Yeah, they're thinking they're about to die, but Moses reassures them that God is doing this to show them that he's here, not that he's going to kill them. It's more of a beneficial thing and to show them or to put the fear of him in their hearts so that they will not sin, not to kill them, verse 20. And so now at the end of chapter 20, God gives them instructions about building simple altars of pieces of the earth or uncut stone wherever he causes his name to be remembered. Basically, wherever a great deed happens. An immediate thought that comes to my mind of one of these events is when they crossed the Jordan River, they put the stones up as a memorial to tell their children. But what is weird or unusual about this instruction for the altar? I'll give you a hint. How are altars in other religions, especially at the time, made? Well, they're extravagant. What were you going to say?
Gold.
Silver, gold, huge jewelry, all of these things with carved images all around them, and then obviously an idol somewhere. God says, if you even put a hammer or your work tool on these stones, you can't use it. Just throw it up there. And it's just interesting. Why that? And what most people, at least who I've been reading, would say is that it's more this idea that God doesn't need all these things. He's been showing them they don't need images. He just commanded them specifically not to do any carven images. And he still wants them to have memorials. And these are these type of memorials where they'll use like when they cross the Jordan River. But it's really, you're not supposed to be like the nations. You don't need these fancy things. When I'm ready for what I want you to do, I'll tell you specifically. But for now, just do it with what you got. Let it be seen, let it be known. It's unusual for a purpose. How is that an altar? Because God said it's an altar, even if it doesn't look like what your usual altar is. So does that make sense to everyone? Are there any thoughts on that?
Sometimes I think we are earthen vessels. The glory goes to God, not to us, as we offer spiritual sacrifice. It just came random out of my mind, but, you think of that, God wants the focus to be on him and what the sacrifice means. You can make the altar so fancy that it overshadows the main thing.
Right. And I don't want to disparage anyone or talk down to any other person, but you can see in just as an example, I've been to a few Catholic cathedrals, and when they are presenting things to God, their rooms are made out of gold. Oftentimes you see a huge painted dome on the roof. Their priest will come in with these large garments and different color jewelry and all of these things. And it's not to be rude to them, but you see how that is a little distracting. You're seeing the magnificence of what they're doing on the physical side, which takes away from what they're doing on the spiritual side. And that's a good point to bring up to them. Anything else on chapter 20?
I think it's interesting that he lays down some laws and immediately gives them here, about talking about sacrifice. He knows that no one's going to keep these laws perfectly, and so therefore he needs sacrifice right away. And
Yeah.
it's funny that here's the laws. Let's see how well you do, and then we'll come up with a plan. But he already knows.
Yeah, he knows that they're going to need some help. All right, so technically we started 4 minutes late, so I still have 4 minutes. So we're going to do Exodus chapter 21. Verses 1 through 11, after giving the Ten Commandments, now God begins to give more specific laws for how his people should live together. And the first set of laws deals with the Hebrew servants and slaves. Now, what is interesting about these few chapters is they're not in chronological order. And I'm actually going to next week, when we go through a few more, I'll put it on the PowerPoint, the chronological order, because it really does actually help how you read the book. Because Moses isn't going up to the mountain, coming back down constantly. We know he's going to be up there for a certain amount of days, and he comes down with the Ten Commandments and breaks them and powders them. So we see him talking, back and forth. There's some chronological discrepancies. Not that the Bible is wrong, it's just how they chose to present the text. For our purposes next week, if you think that would be helpful, I'll put it chronologically. But for now, we're given some more laws in chapter 21. The first set of laws deals with the slaves, as we said, and it's talking about people who had fallen into debt and sold themselves so that they didn't have to live on the streets or starve to death. It was a much different slavery than is often portrayed by many people. And this was a normal thing to do in all sorts of cultures. Really, even in America, this was done where you made yourself an indentured servant or slave to stay off the streets, or sometimes to bring yourself over to America. But the point is that even in slavery, God sets clear limits so that no one's taken advantage of. It says, after 6 years, that they must be set free on the seventh year, verse 2. And the master must not send him away empty handed. And if a slave had wives and children, there were more laws about whether they leave or stay together. And even if the servant loved the master and he didn't want to leave when his time was up, There was a condition that says you don't have to, in verse 6. You can stay. But the point is that God doesn't want any of his people, especially those in a bad situation, to be taken advantage of, and they don't want them to take advantage of others either. And this is something that Jeremiah actually talks about, and Ezekiel, how they've kept their slaves too long. They won't let the people go. That should have never happened. God put this in place so that they would be well taken care of. And there's even more special protection for female slaves who would have had less rights in many nations at the time, but God gave them special protection because he knew that they would need special protection. And he took care of them. And then in verses 12 through 27, he goes on to give some laws about violence. And let's just be clear, God is very clear on his thoughts on violence. Um, Larry, would you please read verse 12 of chapter 21?
All right. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death.
Thank you. I mean, is that any less clear? It's very simple, but there's also in this section a very strong distinction between intentional murder and accidentally killing someone. Verse 24, then we go down, sorry, in verse 24, we get the famous eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Now, how is that usually used? Yeah, I'm going to get my revenge. You do this to me, I'm going to do this to you. But when God gives this, it's, have you ever heard the word lex talionis? It's just retribution. It is not so that you take your own revenge, but that the punishment given for a crime is equal to the crime, not more severe than it should have been, and not less severe than it should have been, equal to the crime. Not about revenge. So people misuse that all the time. I'm sure you've heard it used for revenge, but it's lex talionis. It's a fun word, and I'll ask about it next week. But God also gives specific protections for servants who are injured by their masters. And if a master causes serious harm, the servant has to go free, verse 26 through 27. Then the rest of the chapter, 28 through 36, God deals with animal things. If a man digs a pit and your animal falls in the pit, whose responsibility is it? Well, he'll tell you. But what's the point in all of these specifics? It's that nobody is taken advantage of. No one is left in a bad situation because God wants these people to take care of each other and to make sure that no one is abusing any type of power in his nation. So that's where Lex Talionis comes in, and that's where a lot of these laws that he's going to give come from wanting justice. And that is fitting for the God of justice. Are there any thoughts as we conclude?
I just want to mention to your point too, that in verse 16, where I think a lot of people understand, more recent definitions of slavery, the point's exactly right there, that kidnapping and selling.
Yeah, it's a totally different type of slavery.
That was put to death.
Exactly. And that is a good point. I meant to bring that verse up when I was talking about slavery. You notice the type of slavery that God talks about is when you choose to put yourself in that situation because you need help. And like you said, it's not talking about slavery where somebody kidnaps and sells you. If someone's doing that in Israel, they should be put to death. That's a really good point. But then later we're told what to happen if you find yourself in that situation. What should you do? They're just very interesting. Good thought. All right, if there's nothing else, I think that will be it for this morning. Thank you for your attention.
What a privilege to consider the gifts of God, our fellowship of brethren, and the power of the home. This is Father's Day. Don't always preach a lesson on the traditions of the day, but I'm going to do one today and talking about who can find a godly father. Now, you may say, why do you have such a title like that? Well, you find in Proverbs 31:10, who can find a virtuous wife? And it's a great question. This is a rarity. Godly fathers. And for those who are seeking to marry, It is important. If you'd like to have a godly father in your future home, you need to find a godly man. It is so important to understand that these things don't come out of the blue, a virtuous wife, a godly father. And so let's talk about this. And it's going to be something for all of us. We're going to talk about giving everything we have to God and putting Him first and letting Him influence our life. A godly father. What does God expect of a godly father? Well, really, the root idea is that what does God expect of all of us? If somebody's to ask you, you're a Christian, what does that mean? What does it mean? First off, you have a completely different view of life because you know God. Your relationship with God is the foundation from which everything follows. And you know the two great commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. What is a godly father? A godly father, one who has emphasis upon God. It starts with God. Everything starts with God. Whoever we are, godly wife, godly husband, godly Christian, we got to be thinking about God. What an opportunity we've already had today in approaching the cross. I love the class Will's teaching about Moses and leadership and the nature of God. Who are we? We start with God. God's got to fill us. And then we'll take the role God gives. And it's very interesting as you talk about every Christian. We love Romans 8:28, and Romans 8:28 is a beautiful verse. When we are committed to the promises of God, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. Now, notice what God does with us after becoming a Christian. For whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son. The passion for every one of us. Let me become more like God. Let His thoughts become my thoughts. And by the way, you're going to have to be Bible readers to do that. You're going to learn how to worship to do that. It's not passive, it's not inactive. We need leaders. And in the home, that leadership falls upon the father. Now, I want to say something about being the father, being a leader. It's not all about you're going to do what I say. It has a lot to do with taking someone who is helpless and protecting them and nurturing them and loving them and building them into something. And you know what we got to have? If somebody's going to change us, we got to know that they love us. We've got to trust them. They got to be around us. Did you know that every one of us are adopted children, and you know who our Father is? The Heavenly Father. It's interesting how Jesus used that term in His ministry, Heavenly Father. When we think of God, we should think of the ultimate example of what being a father means. Look at Romans 8. I like this. If many are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. I'm very thankful for my dad. A lot of things I learned from him. Men need men. Men need examples. And I can remember as a kid, my dad can beat up your dad. You know, if there's a problem, my dad's here. It's okay. And it's a beautiful thing. Men, if we are developed by a godly father, we learn how to be men. And there's a power in thinking back to those examples. And one of the things we're seeing in our culture today, it's affecting all of us. It's affecting the church. We're letting children be born out of marriage altogether. The neighborhood I grew up in has got a 92% illegitimacy rate. We have many fathers are just wanderers, and there's no connection. Again, I realize some of you have gone through those difficult times, and I'm trying not where you're at, you can go forward with God, but I am saying The family, when it does what it ought to, can help people be put together. We got men today that are just stressed out. They're filled with anxiety, and sometimes it goes back to the home. One of the things we've seen in our culture, and this is a whole other area, I talk about this some, but the role of men has collapsed in the last 50 years. I feel like I've gone to another planet. And you even see hostility in the educational realm toward men and blanket statements being made about men. We could debate the political terms, but toxic masculinity, things like that. Again, as long if you define your terms, maybe we got something to talk about. But I want to tell you something: the role of men have collapsed. The suicide rates have jumped up. The problem I am seeing right now with my two eyes here in Charlottesville, as I'm working with people, we have men that don't even know how to provide for their families. They have a very difficult time just stepping up and seeing the need, and they don't get jobs and many other things. And even if they don't know how, they're not driven to take a different approach to make that happen. There's just tremendous effects that have happened in our culture. So when we go back to this, God, what a compliment that Abraham had. God blessed him in so many things. We talk about we have the faith of Abraham, but listen to what God said about Abraham as a father. In Genesis 18 and verse 19, for I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham that which he's spoken to him. You know what God said about Abraham? He's going to be my kind of father. And you go in the Romans 4, basically Abraham is the father of us all. We imitate the faith of Abraham, but we need godly men. And again, you see this in the church, the collapse of men participating in church. Now, a lot of it has to do with leadership in church. There's a lot of other problems within the church. But as a man, as a Christian, the number one goal, I want to give my children to God. There's nothing else more important. I want to go to heaven. I don't want others to go to heaven. And we got to have that focus. And when I fail as a father, it will affect my children. I'm not saying children can blame everything on their parents. But I want to tell you something. As the head of the house, when things aren't going right, that responsibility falls on me. And I realize I can't change the past. I know there are days of opportunity that have come and they have closed. And I look back oftentimes, I could have done this different and that different. That's okay. I'm seeking wisdom. I'm not trying to fill myself with guilt. But we need leaders. We need godly men. Let's talk about God's arrangement. God has designed man, and we can talk about this, and I'm not going to debate this from a worldly standpoint, although we could, and talk about how men are put together, their bodies, the testosterone, other things, they're being strong. There is a design with men that we are fixers. We like problems. If we're trained well, we're trained to fight. Now, fighting is not wrong. Matter of fact, we need more fighting. We're soldiers. Men can be very quick to fight now, so we're weaker in other areas, and that's why we need godly women, because sometimes we're ready to fight, but what we need to do is do the long-term, day-by-day things, and sometimes we don't like that. But anyway, I'm getting off the topic a little bit. Men are designed to be leaders by creation. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:3, but I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. This is Scripture. Headship, leadership. 1 Corinthians 11:7, for a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. And nevertheless, but woman is the glory of man. But man is not from the woman, but woman from the man. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. But here, what we see here is that men, folks, we ought to be reflecting the glory of God. You want to talk about a steep test. I'm glad I learned this and thought about this before our first child came into the world. Our first son, Stephen. Remember holding him And did you know one thing as a father that I realized? My son's first concept of who God is what he's going to see in me. And if that doesn't humble you, and that's what I try to do. In my interactions with my son, I wanted to the best of ability to reflect the character of God, and I know I did that imperfectly. But you see, this is what a godly father thinks. We go back to the creation. And so it's interesting. We've already talked about Abraham and how Abraham was commended by God, but Ephesians 6:4. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord. Do you know what I have seen in weak churches? Men who are indifferent and women almost doing it all. And by the way, thank you for godly women that in the lack of men that stand up, that you're going to stand up and do everything you can. My dad was not a church attender during my childhood. My mother was, and my mother tried to teach me and my brother. It was imperfect, but I want to tell you something, she succeeded. She instilled the godly faith in me. Now, my dad later changed, and it was the influence of the son. And so, godly mothers, thank you, godly mothers. I pray you would have a godly father with you. You may not have that. You can make it. But men, we talk about trying to fix things. Guess what? Job number one, bring my children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. A lot of times people, I'm going to let the women do that. No, you're not. This is your job. Now, I tell you what, you got a godly woman who's a great teacher. Yes, you could delegate. And yes, having a virtuous wife who loves God, what a powerful, powerful thing. Oh, my, yes. But men have to step up to the task, as we've already seen, to command his children and his household after him, to have that authority. Let's talk about Joshua. Old Testament Joshua, he was a leader of God's people. It's a great example of how a father leads. In Deuteronomy 31:7 says, and Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. I'm given a job. All right, God has given me a job. I'm leading my family as Joshua led the nation. I'm leading. How am I doing? Do I keep track of it? Do I think about it? Am I just coasting? And see, one of the things you're going to see with Joshua, we got the promises of God. In Hebrews 11:30, it says, talks about how when the taking of land, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. They did that marching because of the promises of God. When you have the promises of God, it changes you. You want to have courage. I know God is with me. Oh, when the Sanhedrin grabbed the apostles for the first time, the same group that had crucified Jesus, the same group through their actions caused the disciples to flee like scalded dogs when Jesus was arrested. Now they're bringing these guys in. We're going to rough them up. We're going to scare them. And the next thing you know, they found 12 men that would look at them eye to eye, cheek to cheek, jaw to jaw, and says, we're going to teach what God says, and you can threaten us all day long. That's what men do. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men, they marveled and they realized they had been with Jesus. You're going to be strong as a godly father. You're going to be with Jesus. You're going to keep thinking as he did, looking at those examples, letting those lead you. Leaders, passion, purpose. And so again, the great thing with godly men, when you're zealous about something, you know what godly men do? They like to be with other godly men. We talk about things. Now, there's some very insignificant things us men can get excited about. You know, Will likes to run and work out. Now, there was a day, you can't tell it now. I still try to do some things. I like to work out, and runners getting together. Oh, people that weren't runners. Oh, no, here they go. They're going to talk about it. And we can be really crazy about things. And it's okay as long as it's secondary. But I want to tell you, when you're around a godly man and you're a godly man, you got some things to talk about. You love to be together with other people who have a passion for God. And unfortunately, it's rare to have those associations. In Deuteronomy 31:23, it says, Then he inaugurated Joshua the son of Nun and said, Be strong and of good courage, for you shall bring the children of Israel to the land which I swore you, and I will be with you. One of the great weaknesses in the church today, and I say this kindly, I want to change it. I'm not trying to cut the church down. But in our culture, we have many cowardly men in the church that haven't developed courage. The reason why I say that, I served as a shepherd once. I've certainly preached for years. And there are times you've got to address things by the will of God, kindly but firmly and plainly. And I'll tell you what, if you got a weak church, you may have some people want to fight you. Okay. But what saddens me is sometimes I'll see men, they know what's right, and their eyes get big and they sit on their hands and they sit there and they do nothing. Let us be men of faith. God is with me. I'm going to do what's right. And you know what a good leader can do? A good leader can have a whole bunch of weak people around them and they lead and they show confidence. And guess what? The cowardly people finally go, oh, okay, we'll go this direction. And you're hoping to help them grow. Moses had to do that with a bunch of weak people. Joshua did that with people. Joshua 1:6, be strong of good courage, for this people shall to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn to it from the right hand or the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. You know one thing men are going to be good at? Are you ready? Discussing scripture and debating doctrine. That's bad today. That's negative. No, not what it's done with leaders. I want to tell you something. With my children in a worldly way, I try to teach them in driving the car not to drive on the wrong side of the yellow line. Why did I do that? I didn't want them to hit somebody head on. I try to talk to them about watching out how somebody may want to take advantage of you, take your money, do other things. When I talk about debating doctrine, that's what I'm talking about. There's a whole other realm, and there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, here are differences, let's debate it. And from the pulpit, good men are going to address things that the congregation need, regardless of how controversial it may be. Now, we're going to do it humbly and carefully. It's not my way or the highway. But what godly men do, they see problems and they stand up and face it, and they want to train other men and women to face it too. Communication, boldness, courage. Have I not commanded you, be strong and of good courage? Do not be afraid or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Good leaders can change a large group of people. Godly fathers, you want to talk about having a hard job? Be a godly dad, raise children. I'm going to tell you something. I'll say this plainly. It's the hardest thing you will ever face in your life. Being an elder of a church would be easier. So you can do it, but you got to stay on course. You've got to stay with courage. And the problem we're facing today with all of our men is prosperity. And you know what you do with prosperity? You've got a lot of choices of things you can do. I've got a rabbit brain. You know what a rabbit brain is? I think this, I think that, I think that, and something distracts me. Maybe it's like, what is it, the hunting dog or the dog where you throw something, he'll go this way, that way. I'm easily distracted. Guess what online things do? Guess what having 120 channels that you may want to watch out do? You got to know yourself. We have to stay on track. It's nothing wrong with having some recreation. There's nothing wrong in enjoying maybe some website you go to that's godly, that's good, that's okay. But the problem we're facing with our men is that we're spending all of our time on things and we're accomplishing nothing. It's the doom scrolling, the thing about screens. And you know what? One of the problems is a major problem. Again, I'm getting off topic a little bit. but our men don't know how to have relationships. And they particularly, even our young men in colleges, they're not dating. It's not happening very often. I saw that in Auburn. We had a group of over 100 college students, and there were godly women there that were there, wonderful. And they never were asked out for a date for 4 years. And there were young men that just hardly didn't go out on dates. We don't know how to have relationships because of screens. So I'm getting off on that, but screens have affected us. And that's a problem. Men, if they're going to be leaders, they've got to learn how to lead people, not having an online presence. And that is a major problem. James 1 talks about the double minded man. You got to let the main thing be the main thing, and we can get our minds going. If you're double minded, you become unstable in all your ways. Verse 8, he is double minded man, unstable in all of his ways. James 1, here's another problem with the rabbit brain. You hear something, I heard a good lesson this morning about being courageous, and then the next thing you know, my ball team's playing today. And then I'll get to something else. You've got to not only hear, but this is where courageousness comes in. I am going to make a change and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that change. There is what leadership looks like. I got a lot of good men. They'll hear a lesson. I'll hear good things. It's a great lesson. And that's it. That lesson has come and gone. There's no application. Hey, I got to fight that too. It's not just others, it's me. When I hear something and I'm convicted of something, how do I make it happen? And I can be distracted with this and that and that, and then, it just goes out of my mind. So don't be like the person who looks in the mirror and then goes and forgets what God says. And so, what I'm talking about is overstimulation. Sometimes, brethren, we got to pull the weeds. And the weeds are things that aren't necessarily bad, but they take our energy away. As Matthew 6:21, for your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body is full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you in darkness, how great is that darkness? Godly men have to be determined. We have to cut out mess. And some of us may ought to get off the internet altogether if we're getting distracted by that and getting all upset about political things and other things, and while we got things that's under our oversight that we're neglecting. We got to step up, man. Got to step up. So it's interesting. Joshua 1:18, I like this. Whoever rebels against your command and does not heed your words, and all that you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and of good courage. Joshua required men to stand with him, and God says, I'm going to provide that. Leadership is critical. We cannot be indifferent to God's provisions and be strong. I'm going to go to the next section here in our outline. By the way, the last section of the outline, I'm not going to cover very much in detail at all. I'm really going to focus on this for the remainder of the lesson, this particular section. How does a godly father think? My dad fought in World War II. He was uh, a leader in an elite unit that trained men to take the beach on D-Day. My dad was always the baseball coach, football coach. It's one thing I like sports. My dad would take me to ball games, and as the coach, he'd talk to me about things. He'd give me life lessons. How does a man think? A godly man think. Now, when we've got the right battlefield, here's how we think. Be on the alert. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. We got the right battlefield. Let me tell you what godly men do. We try to protect our family. I'll tell you, if you want to bring shame on me, it's for me to think that I failed in taking care of my wife and family. There's sometimes I've neglected and I've let that happen, and that is to my shame. As a man, I want to provide. I want to provide protection. I want to provide what my family needs. And say, here's where I get in trouble sometimes. I give them what I think I need, you know. There's some man likes to hunt. If he goes gives his wife a shotgun, he thinks he's providing for her needs. And that's probably not the case unless she goes hunting with him. As a provider, I've got to be listening. But I not only want to protect my family, I want to make sure they have what they need. Be on the alert. There are dangers that are out there. Revelation 12 and verse 9, introducing Satan in the book of Revelation. You know what Satan's number one job is? Number one job is deceive. In John 8, it says he's a liar and the father of it. Men, we've got to learn how to discern doctrine. We've got to learn how to lead. We've got to learn. I'm not saying that we're trying to be suspicious of everybody, but we've got to see danger coming. I don't like it when I don't see something coming and it hits me. What's the old saying? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You may get me one time, but I want to be watchful. We've got to think ahead. Again, don't become a worrywart. Don't come in and try to take God's side and try to figure out what the motive is of everybody. That's what the political realm does. Accusation. No. We're talking about God's wisdom, being able to watch. This is one thing that's really important as men. And you know, the fascinating thing, again, in one of the earlier lessons that Will brought up in Deuteronomy, in the book of Exodus, when God instituted the Passover, there's several times, and not just with the Passover, where he talks about in the future where fathers, when you teach your children. I'll tell you, I tried to do this. I know Yvette tried to do this. I know sometimes our children got tired of hearing it. But we try to give them instruction at different levels and maybe wore them out with it. But you know, one day what I wanted to have with my children, I know my voice is going to remain with my children, and I want that voice to be talking about things that matter and they hear it. You know what's funny? My dad only had one automobile accident that I could ever remember of in my dealings with him, and he made a mistake. Somebody was merging. He thought they were going to go ahead, so he looked back, looked at the traffic, and this person suddenly put on their brakes, and he hit that person. And my dad told me about that. My dad was passionate about it. I was not when the accident occurred, but he told me where it happened. Whenever I still can imagine that intersection and what my dad told me. And when I'm driving and somebody's about to merge ahead, the words of my dad come to my mind. I'm not going to take my eyes off of them. I might glance real quick. So it's interesting how that the words of fathers can last with our children. I want them to remember to love God. Don't quit. Serve God. We're telling them don't take vengeance. There's things I pray that are in the consciences of my children. That voice, long after I'm gone, is going to be with them for the rest of their lives. Act like men. Be brave. Learn. I want my children to learn. You gotta keep feeding on God. You gotta daily keep that mind strong. That's how you win the battle. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Fathers, the battle is winnable, but it's got to be keeping people before the Word of God. And so, again, I go back to screens. Men still want to be courageous, don't we? We want to fix things, don't we? Again, the older generation, we don't understand what the younger generation is, but the younger generation have almost totally got themselves up in fantasy and imagining them doing something like they're playing a video game or watching some Star Wars episode, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it says somehow think you're going to be strong because you imagine it. What I'm talking about here is that we've got to get into the real world. We can't stay in the entertainment world. There's some people thinking they're doing a lot of good, and all they're doing is sitting back, doing nothing, and thinking about things in their mind. We're talking about what has happened to a lot of our younger generation. Rather than be watchful for real enemies, they're watchful for fictional enemies. And that's another lesson for another day. I need to understand that as a man, the trials will come. I want to anticipate those trials, and I want to be determined to face it. A couple more points, and the lesson will be yours. Yesterday, we studied John 18 in our Bible reading. And you know, Jesus, when he prayed at the Garden of Gethsemane, he sweated tears of blood. That Jesus almost physically died in Gethsemane through the agony that he had. He was unto death. You know what Jesus doing in Gethsemane? He was anticipating the battle. He was preparing his mind for it. And when he left Gethsemane, he was ready to face it. You know what? When you and I as men are ready to face a problem, let's say there's a church, there's a doctrinal battle, and I've studied it out. I'm kind to my brethren, but I know what is right, and the time comes up, and it may be fearful that I face it. I'm going to stand up and face it, not run from it. In John 18, when Judas and the soldiers with all those staves and spears came to capture Jesus, they thought they were going to have to run after him. And Jesus walks right up to them. Whom do you seek? That's what leadership is like. I like it in 9/11 when everybody's fleeing from those burning buildings, and guess what? There was a stream of people going to those burning buildings, and that was the firemen and the policemen. As a man, and there's a responsibility for me to face. I want to face it. I don't want to be a coward. Sometimes I've been a coward. I'll go back and look over there and say, I need to do this differently. Notice what Paul said to Timothy. Therefore, I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. You've built this, you prepared. Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony of the Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but share in me in the sufferings for the gospel according to the power of God. This is our battlefield. It's when you stand as a man, you sometimes feel like you're all alone. There have been times in churches where I've had to take a stand, and I remember other men talk about having to take a stand, and they think they've got other men going to stand with them, and the next thing you know, they feel like they're at the shootout at the OK Corral. There they are by themselves with the wind blowing through their hair, and the people that ought to be standing sitting there, oh. And you know what? I hate those events when they happen, but that's okay. Stand. The standing of one person can make an enormous difference. We need more men. We need more men. And so I want to look at the outline, no more PowerPoint, and give you, just read the list here. What responsibilities that godly fathers learn to accept? First off, as I've said before, he's got to be a provider. If I'm letting my wife bring in the money, I need to provide. Now, there's sometimes I realize you can make some judgments. I'm not saying one size fits all. There have been times where you can make some judgments on how things are dealt with. But I am saying that God has given me the responsibility to provide for my own household. In my generation, if I can't get the job I want, I get another job. If I can't provide something this week for the ideal job, I'll go out. I'll tell you what, I'll sell ice on the street corners. I'll go out and do something. I'll go out work at McDonald's. I'll go out and do something. I'm going to provide while I'm waiting. And there's this concept today. Men are frozen. But again, I'm too much emphasizing that. I need to provide spiritual things. I need to provide for my wife. One of the things, we can may provide all the money in the world, we don't listen to our wives. And that's an easy thing for men to do. When we have a successful job, we can come out, we're happy with that, and we neglect everything else. My provisions are more than money. Number two, a godly man will find strength in understanding and serving. You see, if you come worldly, it's all about you. I got my sports, I got my things, and we negotiate. No, no, no. I want to be a servant. You got to listen to your wife. It's not a bad thing, it's a great thing because you're going to find out your wife loves you. When my wife married me, she gave up a lot of things and put herself at risk, at great risk, by marrying me. And I've remembered that. I've not been I've fallen short as a leader many times, but it has been my goal. She trusts me that much. I want to do what's best for my home and for my family. Number three, to make time to communicate to those under his leadership. I've been in a church once that had elders, and I was a preacher. And one of the elders passed away after a long illness. Another elder got seriously sick, and the elders stopped communicating. They stopped communicating with the deacons. They stopped communicating with the men. I was the evangelist. And I remember finally telling Yvette, I said, well, I now understand what it was like for a godly woman to be in the home where the man's not communicating. That was quite an experience. A godly man communicates. 1 Peter 3:7 talks about that he leads his wife with understanding. Men, are you ready for this one? You need to understand your wife. I'm smiling a little bit about men understanding women. We're wired differently, but you know what? We are wired differently. And did you know the needs of my wife 1 year ago could be different than what her needs today? It certainly is different than what it was 30 years ago. It's the nature of the position. We listen. And then finally, I probably made this point too much. You'll make difficult decisions and you accept responsibility. Let's drop to the end of the outline here if we could. And yeah, let's do this. I'm just going to go ahead and blank that out. Okay, good. All right. Let me read you a couple of verses at the very end of the outline. 1 Kings chapter 2. This is where I want to go. Your children will not always be in your home. What you've done when your children are in your home is an opportunity that one day will have come and gone. And by the way, as long as you're alive and your children are alive, that relationship's important. There's only one thing that matters. Remember this, brethren, only one thing that matters. I want my children to go to heaven, and I want the totality of my example to be in that direction. I'm going to be a memory soon. What are my children going to remember? In 1 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now the days of David drew near that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth, be strong therefore, and prove yourself a man. And keep the judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may be prosper in all that you do, wherever you turn. Brethren, godly fathers, wherever you're at today, we can go forward. I want you to be clear. I made a ton of mistakes. We always, any parent, look back. I wish I could do this different. Wish I could do that different. But I think that my children know my heart and my wife's heart. What a blessing to help our families go to heaven. I heard the story once about a young boy that was going to die of a childhood disease. And The parents were grieving over this. The child was still alive, talking to the dad, and the child said, "You know what I'm going to do when I see Jesus? I'm going to tell him what a great daddy I have." And I hope not just my physical family, but my spiritual family, anyone. I just hope that my life can be an example and my words could be encouragement for someone for to face Jesus and to be ready. You look at Paul with Timothy, you look at Paul with the church, you look at what it means to live this life as a man. Courage, courage, my man. Don't forget the task we have. Matthew 6:33, invitation is extended after this, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. What a beautiful thing. The gifts of God, the ways of God. The world may fight it, but I'm going to tell you something, it ain't going to work. God's way works. If you're not a Christian, begin by having Jesus as your Lord. Enter into him, into that relationship, being born again or being born of water and the Spirit. If we can assist you in any way, invitation is extended as we stand.